everybody, Dana here again with more Tuesday tips for leaders of volunteers, talking about nothing about us without us. This is a well-known slogan nowadays used by a number of groups, but really most popularized in the 1990s by disability advocacy and rights groups. And the phrase actually has its origins in early 1900s Central European progressive political movements as well. But nothing about us without us ties into not only the umbrella of diversity, equity, inclusion, access, justice, welcoming, belongingness, all of these words that we hashtag and use on social media. It also applies to leaders of volunteers having a voice or a chair at the decision-making table for your agency. So have there been, in the past few years, I can think of a few examples, incidents where a decision or policy was implemented about volunteers or directly impacting volunteer programs and the work that is done there without a director of volunteer services or a manager or coordinator chiming in. And that's been all too common. So we're kind of talking about nothing about us without us from a professional standpoint as leaders of volunteers, and the necessity for our voices and experience and expertise to be included in strategic volunteer engagement decisions with the agency. And talking about this in the larger umbrella of creating a welcoming organizational culture and a sense of belongingness. This idea was sparked by a recent phone conversation across some time zones with my friend and colleague, Martin J.Cowling, and we were kind of lamenting to each other as speakers, as consultants, that we get booked for webinars and workshops, which is great, and then it's also up to us to convince the organizations booking the workshop or the webinar or watching a short video like this one that this is just the beginning of the work. That workshop, that webinar on diversity, equity, access, inclusion, justice, belongingness, nothing about us without us, things like that are not only a box to check by HR that like, oh, it's one and done. We've checked the box of the workshop and the webinar and everything is going to magically change overnight. Anyone who has biases or bigotry, it's going to magically evaporate because they had this wonderful workshop and webinar. And I wish that was true, but that's just not the world we're in. That is just not reality. So when you think about nothing about us without us, the workflow to do this is inclusion. If you're aiming for inclusion, you need to set an intention, usually with a plan, and that leads to actions. And hopefully that has a change management or a cultural change or policy change impact that includes the voices of the stakeholders, of the people, of all of the groups that are most directly affected by that policy, by that action, by that decision. Every interaction is an invitation to stay or an invitation to go. Classic phrase, I use it all the time. I learned it from Shanti and Project Open Hand at the beginning of my career, and it's so important. So people won't work as a volunteer or paid staff in most cases. People won't work where they feel unwelcome, and particularly when there's active microaggressions, macroaggressions, biases, bigotries, hostilities. And too many organizations don't take this into consideration with a truthful lens. So this is just the beginning of the work. This is the pebble, a workshop, a webinar, a short video, hopefully is the pebble that then ripples out to truly create inclusion with intention, action, impacts through the rest of the organization and with the voices of the community included. Belongingness and inclusion really requires that long-term commitment to change. And if someone is mistreated as a member of a demographic or a group, especially if in the disability community where it may not be so obvious that someone is identifies as or is disabled in some way, invisible disabilities, and there's hostility, hostile talk, hostile action, hostile policies against them, whatever the demographic is, LGBTQ plus, IA, being female, gendered identities, whatever that demographic is, language, skin color, ethnic background, people from these communities, we talk to each other. So if I go and I have a bad experience as a woman or as a queer person with an organization, one, I'm not ever coming back. Two, the rest of my community knows that that's not a place where they're going to go volunteer or a cause that they're going to support because of these hostilities and biases and bigotries that exist there. So this takes long-term change. It's more than just checking off a list for an HR checkbox that you did the thing. And it requires just a genuine reflection to identify the biases and shifting to include new voices, identifying where people feel uncomfortable, and authentic kind of listening circles or setting up a kind of town halls or surveys. There's a number of mechanisms to kind of listen to the community and have conversations with and inclusive of the voices in the community that may be different than how you've done that before. I've worked in conservation quite a bit, and there's a tendency over the years that fortunately people have been changing, organizations have been shifting their culture, but for too long there was this very white colonial talking at communities and to communities about this is how environmental policy is going to work, rather than having the voices of those most directly impacted also weighing in on decisions that affect their health and their happiness in their local parks, environments, conservation, things like that. So from direct experience in my own career, I've seen the positive change that can occur in including a diversity and authentic reflection of the community that you're working with, that you're in, that you are serving next to on the work that your agency is doing. I've seen that positive change happen in government agencies, which is the last place that we think of cultural change occurring, but it can be possible. It just takes commitment. The other note around nothing about us without us, if you're having an open discussion or a town hall meeting, or you're the kind of agency that has like public board meetings, open discussions should not equal a hateful free-for-all. There's a false equivalence very often, or both sidesing of what's a genuine complaint of harm and a genuine impact of harm that can be recognized by a certain community or demographic group, versus the power structures in place or the status quo feeling uncomfortable that they're hearing about that truth or that bad experience. So check yourselves and make sure that there's an accessibility or inclusion or equity policy within the agencies, or moving towards one where you can make that distinction between we're hearing about harms and that makes us feel bad. I don't want to have bad feelings. Let's stop this conversation. You have to push through a lot of that discomfort and status quo feelings to make real change in the agency. And that's the thing that Martin and I were talking about, where we get the most frustrated, where if there isn't support top to bottom throughout all levels of the organization, and that takes time to build. But without that support and without that leadership commitment to real cultural change, even when it's uncomfortable to do or see or hear, it's going to be uncomfortable in the short term, but in the long term, you do have to center that value of nothing about us without us. And it actually does really equate to a very positive impact, positive brand impact, reputation of the agency for making these difficult changes and doing them with community input can lead to a really great sustainable legacy for the work and the cause that you're doing. So I hope you enjoy these Tuesday tips, and that this does become the spark, the catalyst, the inspiration, the pebble dropped in the pond to ripple out as the beginning of positive inclusion and changes for your agency as well. And we will see you next time.